We will be talking a little bit about the idea of spiritual motion sickness. So, motion sickness, I'm sure everybody in this room has experienced motion sickness, some more than others. There's different types of motion sicknesses. Travel sickness, air sickness. You go in a car, even space apparently, there's space sickness. Astronauts get it, seasickness. It's very uncomfortable. I was once on a lake on a boat in Wisconsin and I got seasick. I've never been seasick before and it just feels so weird. You feel like you're very nauseous and you're like going to pass out. Not a very good feeling. So motion sickness, how does motion sickness occur? It happens when our eyes get focused on something that isn't moving for car sickness, for instance, while the vehicle that you're in is moving. So remember, you are reading a book and the car is not moving, but then, and the book is not moving, but the car is moving. So in your mind, in the inner ear somewhere, we have the anatomy, the way that God made us is that, you can tell if you're upside down or if you're moving or if you're standing still. So you're reading a book and the body says, okay, you're not moving, but actually you're moving. And that is the feeling that you get, that you can get sick because of it. So eyes are focused on the book isn't moving, the car is moving. So there's a conflict between the inner ear that senses the motion and the vehicle, of the vehicle, and what is in our eye. Our eyes are seeing something that is not moving, yet we are really moving because we are in the car. I hope I didn't confuse you. I hope this is really how it happens. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that when we suffer from motion sickness is because there's a conflict between the reality which is our ear perceives and a false impressions that our eyes perceive, and there's this conflict, and then we can be sick because of it, and as a result we get disoriented, dizzy, nauseated. So the point I'm trying to make, the connection, you can say, okay, where are we going with this? Where I'm going with this is that as we travel to this world, we can get disoriented. We can get dizzy sometimes because we may perceive things to be true that actually they aren't true. And I have an example. So Peter, for instance, implies that we can have this perception that life should be fair. But in reality, life is not fair. You can live your life as a Christian thinking somehow life should be easy because you're a Christian, but it's not. And you can have this perception and this conflict in your mind that can make you dizzy. A bit what I mentioned earlier, that you can go to this world and the world can make you sick. But this is something that can happen in your mind because you think in your thoughts that something shouldn't be happening a certain way, yet it is something happening that is making you sick as a result. So Peter tells us that we will encounter, for instance, unjust suffering. I touched a little bit on this in the morning. I'm not sure if I read verse 19, but it says, "For this is commendable if because of conscience towards God one endures grief and suffering wrongfully." This is an instance when we can get spiritual motion sickness because you endure hardship, although you are a faithful Christian. And the Bible Peter calls it something that is commendable. So in this world, we will suffer for doing good. You do something good and you really don't expect something bad to come out of it, but sometimes it does. In 1 Peter, just a verse further, it says, "For what credit is it if when you are beaten for your faults, you take it patiently? But when you do good and suffer, if you take it patiently, this is commendable before God." So, very hard to understand, but it's just something that we need to get used to it, that when you go through life, there will be a lot of things that will happen to faithful Christians, and things are really, really not fair, but you're going to experience them anyway. So, this certainly does not seem right. And that may frustrate us because as Christians, we serve the Most High God. And our perception is that as Christians, we shouldn't be suffering, but in reality, we will. So Jesus said in chapter 16, verse 13, Jesus said that in this world you will have troubles, and we need to get used to that. And further on, he says, these things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. So as we step into this life of being a Christian, you know, the Christian religion, it's not an easy religion. There's many religions out there, and even many churches out there that you can be a part of, and they don't ask a whole lot of you. You can just be there, can contribute, right? But you can be in adultery. You can sleep with your boyfriend, girlfriend. You can just come as you are, and nobody's going to judge you. Very easy, as opposed to if you're really going to follow God's word, there's a lot of restrictions. There's a lot of telling you what you shouldn't do or shouldn't do, and that's not fun. But that's just part of the Christian religion, and it is really for our good, and it's just the fact that it's the reality. James chapter 1 verse 2 says, it may appear as not being fun, but really for us, it helps us in the long run. In James chapter 1 verse 2 says, consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds. So it's implied there that we will face trials of many types. And if you go back in your life, I'm sure that you can point towards many tribulations and challenges that have come your way. And we are told that that's normal, that will happen in our life, even though God is the God of universe and can do anything for us and could potentially remove those trials and tribulation, but God allows us to be going through those tribulations because those are there to really form us and to really help us become who God wants us to become. So that is, as I mentioned, the reality. We are going to suffer, and we are going to face difficulties and persecution and hardship, and life will not be easy for us, even though we are Christians. And as we mentioned this morning, we need to remember that we are not citizens of this world. And if we don't understand that fact that we will have tribulations, we will suffer, and our suffering will be even amplified, and it will be really hard to bear. If you don't understand that suffering is on the menu for Christians, it's going to be very hard for us to deal with it when those sufferings do come. So if we don't understand that, we will be disoriented, we will be uncomfortable, and we will be sick spiritually. It will sicken us. So that is the truth. But if that's the only thing you perceive, is trouble, and the fact that Christianity is all about so much trouble coming all the time, and that's all you see, you certainly can get very discouraged. If you believe that everything that you're going to experience in this life is just one suffering after another and never anything good is coming, you can get very discouraged and disappointed, and really you will never succeed in your faith if all you believe is just the negative and the bad things that are coming to you. I have a illustration about a Civil War reenactment. Some people are very big into this. You know, they have this like this theaters, however you call it, this reenactment where you have South, and North kind of battle. And in this particular, it's supposed to be a true story. The men were taking parts. They were dressed. It was summer. It was not very comfortable, but miserable day, and a lot of things were not going right, and a lot of people are getting frustrated. Sometimes, you get hungry and you get hot outside. You're dressed in all kinds of crazy clothes. Finally, one miserable rebel, one person that was in the enactment, threw down his hat and walked away, and he was grumbling. He says, what did he say? I quit. We're not going to win anyway. So he knew the outcome. He knew he was going to lose. So he just gave up. Forget it. We're going to lose anyways. And he was defeated, didn't accept the idea of his role that involved suffering, and that defeat was really part of the role. He didn't love that. So he simply walked away. And he lost sight of that joy of what all of this was about. The fact that this was really, this enactment is to focus on what happened during the Civil War and all the good that can really come by remembering what happened during those times. And that also can happen to Christians when if all they see is suffering that they have to endure, if all they see is the pain and the bad things that are happening in our life, if they sense that life is one long hardship after another, right? We will get discouraged. You can very easily get discouraged if it's just one difficult thing after another. So sometimes they may continue to go to church, but it could be this empty exercise. They have lost that joy, and their walk as a Christian becomes very weary and very difficult if all they focus on is just the negative, the troubles that it comes, and it's constant conflict in their mind that I'm supposed to be blessed and I'm supposed to be provided by God, and and all they see is just this negative events that are unfolding before their eyes. So question is, how do you fix that? I don't know if you've ever been in your life as a Christian that you feel like is one bad thing after another. Something happens, and when it rains it pours, and how do you deal with it? What do you do to help you move on? So how do you put that joy back in your faith? And the way we really understand what you do about that is when we understand what you do about motion sickness. What do you do when you have motion sickness, other than just popping a few pills? You can do that too, right? And then it's just your mind is kind of like, oh, okay, now I can sleep. So the remedy is to simply look out towards the horizon, the direction in you traveling, and you look at something that is stable, something that is fixed, right? So in order to overcome the false perception of standing still, you need to fix your eyes on something which is really real. If you go in a car and you're getting sick, or if you're on a boat, they say that if you look at the horizon, with me, I did that, it helped a little bit, and then it kind of went away. But you're supposed to look at the line of horizon because it always kind of stays there. Because that is real, that is not moving. So, and similarly for us, when we go into challenges in life, as far as how we're going to deal with that, we are given the solution in Hebrews chapter 12, where it says, let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. So Jesus is the only thing that is real, the only thing that is fixed, and putting our eyes on Him, that is the only thing that is going to help us with the motion sickness, with this feeling of, I'm sick, this is not going so well. Fixing our eyes on Jesus is really the only thing that is going to cure the motion sickness, the spiritual motion sickness. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 21, it says, for to this you are called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow in His steps. I'm sorry. So when things got tough for Jesus, what did He do? He went to the Father. And when things get hard for us, what are we supposed to do? Is look at Jesus, look at Him. And when you look at Him, the motion sickness goes away. So I have an example from World War II, actually, about a lady. She wrote a book, and in her book, her name is Corrie ten Boom. It was about an incident that took place at the prison camp when her and her sister were held in a camp during World War II. And every Friday, the Nazis, apparently, they made everybody undress, fully undress, and then just would kind of health physical check for the week. And then all the guards would kind of stare, and they make jokes and laugh. And then she said one day, as they were enduring this, she said, yet another page in the Bible leaped into life for me. And she remembered in John chapter 19, 23, what it says that he hung naked on the cross. She further on continues to say, I had not known. She said the paintings, the carved crucifixes showed at least a scrap of cloth. But this I certainly knew was the respect and reverence of the artist. But on that Friday when Christ was crucified, there had been no reverence, no more than I saw in the faces of those around us. So I don't know if you've ever considered this, that when Jesus was crucified, he was completely stripped of his clothes. In Matthew chapter 27, verse 28 says, and they stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. Later on it says, when they crucified him, they divided his garments among them by casting lots. If you do a little bit of research on this, you realize that actually when Jesus was hung on the cross, he was completely naked. Just think about that. So the common and expected form of crucifixion by the Romans involved total nakedness. Imagine not just being on the cross. You always, of course, you know that Jesus was crucified, and how terrible is the crucifixion itself. But imagine hanging there, ready to die, and of course very slow and painful death, and being also naked with all the clothes stripped from you. So part of the suffering of the crucifixion was also humiliation. And that humiliation was enhanced by making sure that the victim, whoever was going to be crucified, was completely naked. So that's really what Jesus suffered for you and me. So yes, did he go through a lot of hardship, much, much harder than us? Yes, he looked at the Father. And then we are encouraged to do the same if we go through whatever tribulation that we're going through. If you remember when he was on the cross, even on the cross, he reached out to the Father and he called out to the Father. So the only thing that helped Corrie, that lady that was in that World War II camp, and her sister to endure their miseries was to fix their eyes on Jesus. And it is the same for us, for the difficulties that we experience in life. To have this readiness whenever something gets really hard. Don't try to justify it in your mind and say, boy, this is hard. Just give it to Jesus. Just fix your eyes on Jesus. Too often, unfortunately, Christians don't do that. We get caught up in the daily grind and the bills and, everybody that's sick and the challenges and the difficulties that are tossed at us every day. Or we suffer from an illness, or there are difficulties at work or at home. And if we don't fix our eyes on Jesus, the challenge is that we get discouraged. Most often, in my experience, when somebody is really discouraged, is because they take their eyes off of Jesus. Instead of having that strong connection with Jesus, with God in prayer, the extent to which you're not connected in prayer with God. They say that of everybody in the Bible, most likely the person that prayed the most was Jesus. And you think, boy, Jesus was God himself. And if he needed that much help and that much to pray for, what about you and I? How much prayer do we need? How much prayer do we need? I believe it was said of James, it was said that his nickname was camel knees because he was so much in prayer. And we also have to develop, if I leave this week and you forget everything I said, you can say the one thing he said don't forget is about how important prayer is and how important it is to fix our eyes on Jesus. I really appreciate Brent and Tamara, and yesterday we were talking at their dinner table, and something that came up is that they are both in the habit of having a prayer journal. I don't know how many of you are doing that. Maybe some of you do. But it's a phenomenal habit to write down your prayers. So that really stood out for me because, Imagine you pray for something, and sometimes you say it and then you forget, but how amazing is to write it down, and then you look at it 3 weeks later, and then guess what? I can say check to this one. God says yes. So I wanted to spend more time with them actually to learn some of their tricks and how they do it. It's not one perfect way to do it, but the extent to which you focus your eyes on Jesus, that to that same extent, you are not going to get discouraged. You are not going to weaken your faith. So when we are disoriented and we try to think in terms of how we can fix the problem, we oftentimes, unfortunately, forget about Jesus, and we must remember Jesus and fix our eyes upon Him. We must remember that He knows what you're going through. He's gone through far worse than you and I have. And there's a passage actually in John chapter 16. Jesus was very clear and very honest about the reality in this life. He said, in this world you will have trouble. So Jesus is telling us that life isn't always going to be just like a wonderful experience. The good news, however, Jesus doesn't stop there. That is not the entire verse. He continues and says, I have told you these things so in me you may have peace. So he says, in this world you have trouble, but this is the beauty about the teaching of Jesus. He doesn't just have you deal with it. Okay, you're going to have troubles, deal with it. Is the second part to that, where he says, I have told you these things. Why? So that you may have peace. In this world you have troubles, but take heed to the heart. There's a but. But take heart. I have overcome the world. Jesus has overcome the world, and we can also overcome the world if we step in His feet, in His steps. When it comes to success in any field, I don't care what you want to be successful in. You know, the best, most fastest way to get to success, what is it? Is to go to somebody that is successful, right? What did you do? Write it down, and then you do the same. I mean, if you want to be a mathematician, I would hope you're going to talk to a mathematician, how he got there, or whatever you want to be. Talk to somebody who's been there. And the same thing for us. We want to overcome the world. No better source than going to Jesus, because He has overcome the world, and we want to overcome the world. And the only way we're going to overcome the world and not get weary and fall away and get weak and die spiritually is by pointing our eyes to Jesus. So essentially the Bible says, if you can't handle it, give it to Jesus. 1 Peter chapter 5 verse 7 says, cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. Whatever anxiety you have, give it to Jesus. Give it to Jesus. Why? Because He cares for you. Another passage in Psalm chapter 56 verse 3 says, when I am afraid, I will trust in you. You are afraid, you can just stay afraid. Oh, I'm so afraid, I'm so afraid, I'm so afraid, as opposed to saying, no, I'm afraid. We'll do something about it. What are you going to do about it? Trust in Him. Don't just be afraid. Trust in Him. Trust in Him. Throw your cares, throw your anxieties on Jesus, because He cares for you. So, if you learn to trust God, this world will never slow you down, and you will never get motion sickness. Or you may get motion sickness, but then you cast your eyes on Jesus, and the motion sickness, you start feeling better. Believe it or not, this is all the message that I prepare for you. So I really appreciate you being here tonight. I hope you're going to be here again tomorrow night. So tomorrow night, we're going to talk about avoiding, Brent said, American syndrome. And it's like, what in the world is American syndrome? Everybody's like, what is the American syndrome? It's not the American syndrome, it's the ugly American syndrome. And if you want to know what is the ugly American syndrome, please come tomorrow night. And then we'll continue the series on Tuesday night and Wednesday night. So I look very forward to being together for this week. And now we'll turn over to the song leader. Thank you.